Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. From amongst the auspicious days and nights in the Islamic calendar, which have been identified by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, is the 10th of Muharram, the day of Ashura. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained that it was on this day that Almighty Allah saved the Banu Israel. Scholars explain that this is most probably in reference to the incident when Nabi Musa alayhi salam and his followers tried to flee the tyranny of Fir'aun. They found themselves in a difficult situation. The large army of Fir'aun was behind them, and the never ending deep Red Sea was before them. Inna lamudrakun, his followers exclaimed, "We have been caught." To which Nabi Musa alayhi salam replied, "Kalla, absolutely not. Inna ma'iya Rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord is with me, He will guide me." Thereafter, Almighty Allah miraculously created a split in the sea, which allowed Nabi Musa alayhi salam and his followers to cross the sea unharmed. While the Fir'aun followed, he was drowned by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and therefore destroyed by Almighty Allah Rabbul Izzah. So the first incident that took place on the 10th of Muharram was that Almighty Allah saved Nabi Musa alayhi salam and his followers. The second incident mentioned in the hadith is that after the flood of Nabi Nuh alayhi salam, then the ark had docked on the Mount of Judi on the 10th of Muharram. And the third incident mentioned by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that a particular nation was forgiven by Almighty Allah on the 10th of Muharram. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not mention which nation was this, but it is sufficient for us to know that one particular nation was saved by Almighty Allah, was forgiven by Almighty Allah on the 10th of Muharram. Now, what does this mean for us, and what are we encouraged to do on the 10th of Muharram? The first is that of fasting. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had fasted himself and encouraged us to also fast on the 10th of Muharram. This fast was part of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the early stages of Islam already. Already in Mecca Mukarramah, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would observe the fast on the 10th of Muharram, and thereafter Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged the Sahaba also to fast on the 10th of Muharram. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained that fasting on the day of Ashura, I hope, will expiate the sins of the previous year. So, from the reward itself, you understand how beloved the fasting on the 10th of Muharram is to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Almighty Allah is prepared to forgive an entire year's sins, this fast is really beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regarding this, a hadith of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam explained the best of fast after the month of Ramadan is in the month of Allah, Shahrullah al-Muharram, that is the month of Muharram. Now, this would encourage us to fast throughout the month of Muharram, but more particularly on the 10th of Muharram. So, fasting on the 10th of Muharram is something that we would encourage, something that is greatly rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what's important regarding the fast on the 10th of Muharram is that once Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated to Al Madinah al Munawwara, he had discovered that the Jews of Medina were also fasting on the 10th of Muharram. Upon inquiry, they explained that they were fasting because of the exodus of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, because Almighty Allah freed Nabi Musa alayhi salam and his people. To this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, "Nahnu ahaqqu bi Musa minkum." We are more rightful of Nabi Musa alayhi salam than you. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged the Sahaba to fast on the 10th of Muharram, but he added an extra clause. He said that we should add one more fast, either fast on the 9th with the 10th or the 11th with the 10th. So 9th and 10th or 10th and 11th. And this is Khaliful Yahud. This is so that we go against the ways of the Jews. This is so that our fasting does not resemble the fasting of the Jews. So we are encouraged here for us to fast on the 9th and 10th or the 10th and the 11th. Then what else are we encouraged to do? The next is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that a particular nation was forgiven by Almighty Allah on this day, on the 10th of Muharram, and this is the day in which Almighty Allah forgives other individuals as well. Right? So this is the day that we can increase in istighfar, increase in the recitation of astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. So on the evening as well as throughout the day on the 10th of Muharram, we recite in abundance astaghfirullah with the hope that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will clear our sins and fill it with rewards from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's side. What's also important regarding this is that the objective of istighfar, the objective of Almighty Allah forgiving us is for us to build a relationship with Almighty Allah. So, on these days, let us try to lessen the amount of sins in our life. In fact, let us try to stay away from sins completely, with the intention that, oh Allah, I wish to live a life free of sins in a way that is pleasing to you, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the one was fasting on the 10th and the 11th, or the 9th and the 10th of Muharram. The second was that of seeking of the forgiveness of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third sunnah mentioned by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is that man wassa'a ala iyalihi yawma ashura wassa'a Allahu alayhi as-sana kullah. That person who expends in terms of expenditure on his family, that is on the day of Ashura, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expend for him. What will Almighty Allah expand? Allah will expand his sustenance. Allah will increase the barakah, the blessings from Almighty Allah, and Allah will increase his mercy upon that individual. So we are encouraged now to increase our expenditure on our dependents, on our family members. Now, a few things, a few aspects related to this. The first is the types of spending. The types of spending. Whatever we would be spending on our dependents. So we provide food for our dependents, we provide of clothing to our dependents, we at times offer gifts to our immediate family members. So all of this would be included in increasing in our expenditure on our family members. We can prepare a wonderful meal. We could perhaps buy a new set of clothing for our children, for our wives, and this would all fall under increasing of our sustenance on our family members. The next aspect is that we have an Ashura meal. So we have a bit of a more enjoyable meal on the day of Ashura. When should this meal be prepared? So the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says Yawma Ashura, on the day of Ashura. Now the day Yawm could refer to both the night and the day. So there's absolutely no problem in having it on the 10th, that is the evening before the 10th, or the evening after the 10th. So we purchase the products on the 10th day, and thereafter that iftar we are having the meal. So whether it is on the 10th or whether it is on the 11th, both of the days would be inshallah rewardable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we would gain that blessings and that promise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The next important aspect is that we should be spending on our dependents. So the primary purport and the primary encouragement of this hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is man wassa'a ala iyali, upon one's immediate family members, one's dependents. So to spend on one's dependents, on one's family members, that is encouraged by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If a person wishes to invite one's wider family or invite neighbors and the needy, then that is also permissible, because that is in a general situation that is rewardable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this should be done with the intention or the understanding that this is not a must, it is not required, and it is not the primary purport of this hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now, what's important here is that we are living in a time of consumerism. We are living in a time of consumerism where everything is used for marketing purposes. So let us make sure that we do not get involved in this, and we do not succumb to this pressure of consumerism, that we purchase gifts for a wider family, to friends, to neighbors, and because this is not the actual purport of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In addition to that, what we also remember is that this increase in expenditure on our family members is in no way a license for israf, for a person wasting the ni'mats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We always require to be moderate in our spending, even on this day when we are encouraged to increase slightly on our family members. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the balance in the teachings of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last final aspect I wish to conclude on is that whilst we mentioned three incidents that took place on the 10th of Muharram, these were all incidents that took place prior to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was another significant incident that took place after the demise of the Master sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that was the said martyrdom of Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu an. Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu an was the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, as Muslims, we are pained, we are hurt by this incident. But what's important to note is we understand that virtues of days are established from the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the day of Ashura is special because it was mentioned by Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not because of the martyrdom of Sayyidina Hussein radiyallahu an. So the day is auspicious because of the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's important here is that we are pained, we are hurt by the demise of Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu an, but we should need to be cognizant of the fact that the Shia are using this as an opportunity to further their agendas. This is the 10th of Muharram is the day that they receive much media coverage. It is a day that they further their agendas. So we should not be involved in that as well. What happened in the past was that because the Shia were now commemorating the demise of Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu an, then the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we decided that we shouldn't be seen as those who were actually pleased with the demise of Hussein radiallahu an. So we now started to arrange some of these events on the 10th of Muharram, also discussing the martyrdom of Hussein radiallahu an, discussing the incident of Karbala. And what then this developed into was that we have now, or many of the programs have actually resemble or are resembling the incident or the commemorations and the practices of the Shia, which is something that is really distasteful and something that shouldn't be in our practices. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us understanding. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all the shuhada. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us love for the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. May Allah instill within us love for the Ahlul Bayt, for the family members of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And finally, I wish to mention the one of the important lessons of the day of Ashura, especially when we look at that incident of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, is that inna ma'al usri yusra, inna ma'al usri yusra. After every difficulty comes ease. After every difficulty comes ease. Almighty Allah will not leave a person in complete difficulty. Allah will bring ease. That's the number one lesson. And the second lesson related to that is that inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen. Musa alayhi salam used means. He did try to physically escape Fir'aun, but his trust was in Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we make an effort to alleviate the sufferings and the difficulties that we find ourselves in, but our ultimate trust is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah grant us the understanding. Subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.